Hello, listeners, and welcome to Leading the Way in RVA. My name is Casey Long, and I am the host of this podcast, as well as the founder and owner of Fulfilled Coaching and Consulting. The purpose of this podcast is twofold. First is to introduce you to inspiring leaders here in the Richmond community. And second is to leave you with tactical tips that you can put into practice to support you in your own leadership development. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to someone that was nominated to us by a previous guest, Dontrese Brown. And Dontrese introduced us to James Warren. James is the founder of Share More Stories and is here with us today. And this is our first time meeting, but any friend of Dontrese is a friend of mine.
Absolutely. I feel the same.
Thrilled to meet you and would love to just take a few minutes and hear a little bit about your story and what led you to founding your organization.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm really glad to be here. And Dontrese is a great friend and an even better leader. So as you say, any friend of his is also a friend of mine. I guess, the work I do involves storytelling with teams, organizations, sometimes customers, and often community stakeholders. And I guess I got my start in that. The seeds of that were planted for me even in childhood. My parents told me they would bring me out during cocktail parties in my pajamas, and I'd make up stories and entertain them all as they laughed. And I guess I was doing that since I was 2 or 3. And I've loved the writing version of storytelling. So I've done a lot of writing over my life. But I've also always wanted to own my own business, be an entrepreneur. And, that dream has been part of me also since maybe not quite 3 years old, because I had no concept of that. But definitely by the time I was 12, 13, I was always envisioning, building businesses of some kind. And so a lot of my early career working at Altria Group was around building new products, new businesses, new brands, which I really loved. And then I had the opportunity in 2014 to go out and start that work on my own. And sort of that dream that I wouldn't say was deferred, but had kind of gone dormant, really was an opportunity to start cultivating that. And the first few iterations, the concept testing, the prototyping, I think the first thing I wanted to build was a better social media platform, because I thought Facebook was broken. Even in 2014, I was like, this is not working. And I quickly realized how much work and capital that needed. Then I said, well, why don't we try solving some problems that are close to mine? Like, I've been a frustrated writer most of my life. I've always envisioned myself as an author at some point. And granted, there's plenty of pathways to doing that today. But even then I was like, I want to do it more collaboratively. I want to create a place where people like me can engage with other writers and storytellers. And that was interesting. And there was definitely some interest in that idea, but not enough to really build a business or a platform around it. And so friends and mentors and advisors were constantly giving me this nudge, like, James, you are a great marketer, a brand strategist, and a storyteller. Like, put those together. I would say, no, this is not for brands. This is for individual people. And they were like, what brands are made of? And I said, I know these things, but I don't know. I was trying to sort of create a little bit of a difference from what had felt like 17, 18 years of corporate life to something very different. But in time, I realized those two desires of building businesses and helping people connect through stories really did coexist, and that the market for it could really be organizations and companies that were trying to either deepen their engagement and connection with their employees, strengthen their relationship with their customers, or make a bigger impact in the community. And that's really what led to the development and launch of Share More Stories. So it's been really interesting since then, but that's the point of getting to the launch.
Let's dig into that. Really interesting since then. So a couple things I heard is you've been an entertainer since you were a child, to the point that your family would bring you out and have you share stories.
Yes.
And then you've always had the entrepreneurial itch. Where do you think that entrepreneurial itch came from?
I think that for me was my version of creative expression. I think building things is a form of creativity. I think, the entrepreneurial journey requires a lot of creativity, even if it's not in a more, professionally creative pathway. And so for me, the idea of making things, building them, nurturing them, is just something that I think was seeded in me early. My mom in particular she started her life as an opera singer and then became a minister and pastor. And, I saw what it took for her to start an organization, build a church. And maybe that, sort of seeded in me early. I remember when my dad transitioned from, being a doctor working at the VA to starting his own private practice. And I don't think a lot about those as being formative, but perhaps they are. I also remember growing up in New York, I was reading, Fortune, Forbes, and the Times Business section when I was a kid. So I think something about business just attracted me early on in my life. And I found it fascinating.
Wow. I love like hearing about your parents' dynamic of like your mom being an opera singer and like the heart that goes into something like that. And then your dad going out and starting his own practice after working for the VA. Like you can see how like passion and business collide, and that motivated you and planted something in you.
It did. Wow. And they never, I think my mom's been she's no longer with us, but she was a tremendous influence in my life. And she was the kind of mom that really didn't say no to things. Like if you said, hey, I want to try this, she'd be like, okay, great. Because that was her life. She, went to college early and then went to Europe early. And so I think for her, the experimental life was just the way it was. Mm-hmm. And, you struggle with that sometimes when you're younger because you actually do want a little bit more structure. But now I look back as a full adult and I'm like, I'm glad that my mom was much more of a let's see what happens kind of mom.
Free spirit.
I don't know if I'm not that way. I'm like, we need a little bit more structure and clarity on this. But, sometimes these things skip a generation or they just show up differently.
Yeah. And then two other things I heard that I thought that just really jumped out to me is you seeked out where there was friction, right?
Yes.
So like you have this creativity and this desire to be an entrepreneur. And they always say, and I always think about this because I have that entrepreneurial spirit too, is like wherever there's friction, there's opportunity.
Absolutely.
And so friction being like something takes too long or people aren't getting along or anything, you can make a business opportunity out of that.
I totally agree with that because I think in our case, the friction that we sought out was, and it took a while to get there because in the early times we were thinking about storytelling just as an engagement tool or process, which of course it is well established in that use. But we were really interested in the idea that stories also help us learn, even from our childhood, right? We learn about things, about each other, about our own histories through stories. And when we think about nursery rhymes and bedtime stories, there's the moral of the story, the lesson. So that intrigued me, that the idea that stories weren't just a way for us to be connected, which is really important to me, but that they were also a way for us to learn about ourselves, about each other, from each other. And so that put us on a very specific pathway where we started to find the friction of, business and organizational leaders saying, I've got tons of data, but nobody can still really tell me what it means. Or I've got lots of insights from lots of different research and lots of different things, but nobody's connecting the dots for me. And those things and other things we heard from them convinced us that at a macro level, there was another way to think about how we do research and insights. The other thing that was frictiony is the amount of money we're spending as a society on products and services that we're really not that satisfied with. We're just tolerating them. It's like we spend a GDP on technology and technology works like 80% of the time and we're good with it. And I'm like it should be a little bit better, like 90 to 95%, because 80% is a C, so it's thinking about things like that. How do we help people express what they really want, need, and feel from the experiences they're having in a way that those companies and brands and organizations can do something about it? And we found that the best way to do that is by really helping them get in touch with their own stories about those experiences.
Yeah. And then you're an entertainer by being a storyteller, but you're also an educator.
Yes.
So you're helping people create a compelling way to educate people about their product, their service, or whatever it is that they might do.
Yeah.
Love that. And then the other thing I heard was that you had many people in your life. It was almost, I don't know if and I might butcher what this is called, but I think it's called like the Ikigai model. Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
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 And it's like this old model around thinking about like, what are your skills? What are your passions?
Yep.
What does the world need? Which
Yep.
is that friction,
Yep.
right? And then what could you get paid for?
Yep.
And put it all together.
That's
and
exactly
there
right.
you go. And it sounds like different people that you were talking with when you were trying to figure out where to go and what to do, kind of like directing you to think in that way. And you did.
Yeah.
And here you
It's
are.
funny you bring that up because I remember first being exposed to that concept right around that time.
Yeah.
I don't think I made the same sense of it then that I do now, but today it feels absolutely relevant and clear as like, yeah, that is my intention to have those things be integrated, to not be separate or fragmented, because that's a lot of emotional friction to like have to navigate those things separately because you can't get the fulfillment out of something that touches two or three or hopefully all four of those things. So I look at my life today and I'm grateful to say that, yes, it is definitely the integrated life in that way. So I'm fortunate, but I'm also kind of hungry to keep helping other people figure that out for themselves too, in some way.
Me too. We share that.
Yes.
For sure.
Awesome.
Oh my goodness. So you went out, started your own business around Share More Stories. And what are some, you said like, oh, it's been quite the journey or something like that. Like what have been some of your pivotal lessons since going out and following your passion and your purpose?
Yeah, I think there's a few. One is the need to really identify people who are willing to take that journey with you in some way, shape, or form. And clearly, if you have a spouse and a partner, that's a part of it. Because one of my mentors said early, starting a business like having another kid. And they're like, and it's going to take the same kind of money, if not more, that raising your other kids are going to take. And I'm not talking about whether you have investors or capital. I'm just saying it's going to take everything like it does, like your kids do. And that was very true.
That's why you need to make sure your spouse is on board.
100%.
My
100%.
spouse was not too keen about it. It took a while.
Yes. I mean, my spouse said yes and then was like, what did I say yes to? So we had to have a few realignment conversations to make sure we were still rowing in the same direction. And fortunately we were. But I also think partnerships and real collaboration. So, finding those people who feel and see the vision at scale and are willing to help you find very specific tactical ways to like start moving down that path. I've had a lot of those folks in my journey.
Yeah, it's kind of like a board of supervisors.
Absolutely.
Board of advisors. Like
Yep.
most companies, organizations have a board. Remember in our first session, we talked about you yourself are your own entity. You have your own
Yes.
mission, vision, values. Have your own board. It sounds like that's what
Absolutely.
you're saying. Like people that help advise you and guide you towards where you need to go and what you need
And
to do.
it's really necessary because, I mean, in the biggest sense, when you're trying to do big things, you can't do it by yourself. And I know we all want to have that sense of independence and I got this, but the reality is I believe we're meant to be interdependent. I need a certain amount of my ability to stand on my own and move forward and do things that I'm inspired and motivated to do. And I need to realize that I exist in this bigger context with other people that are either being impacted by me or impacting me. And I think, so many times the entrepreneurial journey is cast on, sort of framed as this, it's you against the world. And it's really the old proverb, right? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yes.
And that has been our truth for sure. And I would say the last thing is being careful. You see this, you hear this in social and other places, like don't compare your day one to somebody else's day 1000. And while I knew that and I understood that, it was still hard because you want to achieve success as fast as you can. And I had to learn that speed is not necessarily success. Speed to milestone is one measurement, but it's not the only. And we were dealt a early painful lesson in that because right after we launched, this was like the heyday of crowdfunding. And I was like, well, we're going to crowdfund our way to success. And we had launched our product and we had what we thought was a very clear explanation of what we were doing. And we launched a crowdfunding campaign and arguably one of the worst crowdfunding campaigns I've ever seen because we wanted to raise something like $45,000 to keep building this, that, and the other. And I think we ended with like 1,800. And it was tough to like keep running a campaign that's not working, but the end date is in January. So do we just stop? No, we have to keep going. But I learned a lot from that because I remember one person said, this was a fascinating piece of feedback. She's like, I don't understand why you need the money. And I'm like, what do you mean? Because we're trying to build a business. And she said, but you already have it. And I was like, well, what do we have? She goes, the website you built as a prototype works just fine. Like, why don't you just focus on operating and scaling that? And I was like, well, yeah, but we have all these other things we need to build. And she's like, no, you don't. And she didn't want to fund it, but she gave me that response that was such a huge, really a gem to realize that sometimes what you have is good enough.
Perspective.
And you need to focus on making that better versus chasing something else that looks, sounds, or you're told to believe is a better version of it. You might have it right there. You might have the diamond in the rough right there.
Yeah. Or you came to believe that to start a business, you have to have mass capital or something. And that's not true.
That's not true.
Right. I probably shared this on here before, but I think it's so impactful. I took some little course at a conference I was at around entrepreneurship, and what they came to say was that the difference between an entrepreneur and a non-entrepreneur is an entrepreneur does and then learns from it, where a non-entrepreneur takes all this time to feel like they have to get everything straight and everything in order before they go do anything.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you were kind of teetering on I have to have all these funds before I can chase my dream. And then this person gave you perspective to be like, actually, no, like build off of what you have and iterate.
And some of that was the change, the shift from corporate to entrepreneurship, because, I mean, I was used to pitching big ideas with big budgets, and if they were good, they got funded and we built them. Building businesses and new brands in corporate is very different than building them on your own. And that sounds obvious until you really start digging in, like, well, then what were that 17 years of experience for if I couldn't use them? And so I had to really understand what things to sort of put in park mode. Like, those lessons will come back later, but they're not applicable right now. And so I've got to go find some new lessons, and quick, because the first piece of feedback I got on like my first pitch deck was, this is very corporate. And I took that as a compliment, and they didn't mean it that way. They're like, no, you've got to change this.
You got to
like,
shake off the
exactly.
Yeah.
I was like, wow. So part of that first year or two was also learning what to let go of, what to go discover, and doing both of those things while like also trying to make money and pay bills and do those things. So it was a journey.
Finding your authenticity in
Yes.
part of all of it. Love that. And so with Share More Stories, just like real quick, what do you want listeners to know about Share More Stories? What would be your story?
Yeah, I think the main thing is the why we exist, and that's to really help leaders and organizations and brands make better decisions based on understanding people's experiences as humans. So what that means is not just understanding what their story is, but how that experience makes them feel and what they're really seeking from you to do to change it and make it better. So that means you have to be talking to leaders who are really willing to listen and not just think, I've got all the answers. I know my business inside out. I know my brand. I know my organization, but who are really saying things are good, but they could be better. And I don't know how, or things aren't working as well as they should. And I don't know why. And that's when we are really useful to that type of leader, because we're going deeper than their traditional listening tools or research tools and really helping them unpack those experiences that they're delivering and figuring out those emotionally driven ways to make them better. So, I mean, that's why I love my job, because every day I get to help an organization or a team or an individual really realize something that maybe they didn't know or know as deeply or feel as deeply about the people they serve. And when they do, most of those leaders are so committed to improvement, you see the change start to happen pretty quick. So it's fun.
The power of story.
Yes, absolutely.
Storytelling. In my years at Capital One, data-backed storytelling was like one of the number one skills we were constantly working with people to develop, because you got to have the facts and you got to have the compelling story and you put it together, and that's what leads to change. Well, great. Well, what is the leadership topic you brought for us to chew on today?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really been resonating for me, just looking at my own journey, but also some of the folks we've been working with, is how leaders navigate to impact and how it really starts with their intention. So I would say it's really about understanding and clarifying and getting really real about your intention, and then moving through steps to get to the impact you seek. And a lot of leaders, I think, get one side of that equation right, but maybe not the other. They are very, very outcome driven, but they never pause to really think, what is my intention? Like, is this the result that I intended to have? It is a great result, but is this the result I intended to have? Or vice versa, they're really good at framing their intentions, but they don't think about the outcome and asking themselves throughout the process, am I seeing it? Are we getting it? And so, we think a lot, and I talk a lot about that journey. And for me, it really starts with a leader who's willing to be vulnerable, to say, in order for me to achieve the impact that I think I or we can have, I've got to be honest. I've got to be vulnerable. I've got to get really, really clear on where my limitations are and what other people's needs are around me, and become almost an emotional steward of their experiences. And then move through a very consistent process of listening, learning, validating, coming up with better ways to deliver those experiences, and always saying, is this getting us closer to the impact we seek? So to me, that's really where I see a lot of opportunity for leaders of all size teams and all types of businesses or sectors to just strengthen their effectiveness by getting more intentional about what they want to do and being much clearer about the impact they seek to have.
Yes, this is a lot of what we've talked about in leadership in general. But what I hear you saying is like many people, including myself at times, just like go through the motions.
Yes.
And we might be results driven, and we're just so focused on that that we lose the purpose behind like what it is that we're doing. Or many people strive towards something, but then they don't take the time to track what they're doing. And what you're saying too is making me think of a boss I had at one time who was like, my mission is to align people's actions with their intentions. And he would like do this hand movement like this, actions with intentions, get them aligned. And it sounds like that's a lot of what you're saying. Where do people start, like to make sure that they're aligning their actions with their intentions? Where would you recommend people start?
Yeah, if they've got like a team, or they've got their own business, or they just work for themselves, they're doing something all day, every day. Mm-hmm. So the first question is, well, what are you doing? What are your actions? Start listing them out. It should start to trigger a little bit of an intuitive response of things that feel like they are adding value versus things that I'm not sure of. Mm-hmm. But also things that I feel, back to the framework, the ikigai, things that I feel for some reason I should be or need to be doing versus things that I don't. And so that starts to at least give the leader a little bit of a self-reflection of, here's what I'm doing. And either it's feeling like it's purposeful, even if I'm not sure if it's achieving a great result, or it feels like there's a lot of activity there, but I'm not sure why I'm doing it. So now the next thing I would do is assess that. Well, why am I doing this work? Why am I running this business? What is my why? What is my purpose? I talk a lot about that from a calling perspective. I say my calling is for people to experience hope and revelation with me. Like, that's really why I believe I'm here. So even in research, I want them to have things revealed to them that they didn't know about. I want them to feel optimistic that they can grow and their teams can grow. It needs to be realistic optimism, though. So, that to me guides my actions. It guides what I'm doing. If I find myself feeling frustrated, like I'm not achieving the impact I want, I've got to look at my actions. Am I doing things that are off plan or a waste of time or what have you? And then sometimes when you have that, the other big piece of input is to start talking to the people you work with and ask them, what are you experiencing with me? How is my leadership style impacting you? And that's a simple conversation. And if you're not used to it, that's the vulnerability piece. You might have to really say, okay, start with somebody who seems like a friendly. You don't have to start with the person you have the most challenge with. Start with somebody close in that's easy to talk to, that you have a very strong relationship with, and get clear on how you're impacting them in their actions. Because if you lead a team or you're building a business beyond yourself, eventually your actions are really about influencing the actions of others. So you've got to start to really assess those things too. But it can be as simple as a piece of paper and a pen and a checklist, and starting to just take inventory and see where there's opportunities to close that gap, like your former leader used to say.
Yeah, I love all of that. Tons of tactical tips here. So one of the things I heard was getting clear on your mission or your intention, and you have a very clear one. I love that. And making sure you know that. And then what I like that you said, I often think about, okay, if this is my mission, what would my ideal calendar be?
Right.
To make sure that I'm living into that. But what you do, which I think is really cool, and now I'm going to go home and do it, is looking back at where you have been spending your time.
Yes.
Say, how imbalanced or out of balance am I in? what might need to change? How much does desk scrolling on social media really serve my mission, or watching all these reality TV shows? That was a revelation I continue to have and had the other day. So there's that piece. And then you go on to think about, all right, how do I also get other people's perspectives around this? So best practice I often do with clients is have them go around like 6 to 8 trusted peers or family members. Kids are really good too. And ask them like, hey, what are 3 to 5 words you would use to describe me at my best? And what are 3 to 5 words you would use to describe me at my worst?
I love that.
And then you simply say thank you, because feedback is a gift.
Yep.
So you always want to say thank you. You don't need to like dig in and be like, tell me more about what bossy means, or whatever it is that they share. And then you just get this nice inventory of where you're spending your time and how you're being perceived. And then I agree, that's a beautiful way to get your actions in line with your intentions.
There was, I love that frame a lot. And I think it's also a very emotionally driven one, because it helps me tune into what people are saying, how they're experiencing me. So I love that. And one that I also had growing up at Altria was, what should I stop doing, start doing, or change?
Continue. Yeah. Start, stop, continue. Yeah.
We would do start, stop, or change, right?
Start, stop, change.
And so what I loved about that is it becomes very, very clear, very actionable, very tactical, and also almost a little less emotional. I like to balance both the head and the heart. So that one to me feels very much more like, just give it to me straight, factually. Like, what are the things that I'm doing that I should stop, start, or change? And I also love what you added, which is give me 3 to 5 words that describe me at my best and worst, because that's also the truth of the emotion as they see it, how they feel when they are interacting with me at my best or my worst. And I think that's really, really important for the leader to be aware of.
Yes. Start, stop, change would be like doing things that I'm doing. And then the best and worst is being.
Yes.
And doing and being are
there it is.
2 things
there
that
it
bring
is.
you together as a person. So
yes.
I love that. Yes. Feedback, incredibly powerful in helping you make sure that you're aligning your actions with your intentions. Like I said, kids can give you some of the greatest feedback. I once a quarter, probably when I'm putting my kids to bed, ask them that question that I told you I asked peers, like, what would be the 3 to 5 words you would use to describe mom on her best day? And what would be the 3 to 5 you would use to describe her on her worst? And it's always fascinating.
Well, some of what you're describing also for me is what's happening in the middle of intention and impact, which is, insight. The insight piece is gathering perspective and feedback from people in your life. And then the action piece, which we've talked about. The last thing that I would say about impact is, I think so many times people want to make that sound, they think it has to be really, really fancy. And to me, impact is human change. So what is changed in this person or these people's lives as a result of their interaction with you or your business or your brand? That's impact. It's not they did this, they came here, they bought this, we retained their membership. It's as a result of those things, this is what's changed for the good in their life. That's impact. And I think a lot of folks think that that's only a quote unquote nonprofit community oriented measurement question. It is, to me, a holistic question. We should all be asking ourselves, how do I make a better impact? And that starts by assessing where I'm at, how other people see me, and then what am I doing that's helping people create that change in their life that they want to see? And it could be a small thing that adds up, or it could be a big thing that happens with less frequency, or a little bit of both. But if we're not trying to really actively contribute meaningfully to other people's lives, then I don't think we're in that interdependent space. I think that's just independence. And for me, at least, it's not going to cut it.
I agree. When I started my business, so much of what I do is coaching, individual coaching, team coaching, or leadership retreats, workshops. And I, like you, like to know and measure my impact. So, for example, if I'm working with a client, we set their clear objectives, our intentions at the start of a coaching engagement. And I do like a simple pulse survey on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident would you say you are right now with executive presence? And they would give me a score. And then we track that like every couple
Yeah.
sessions. And same with like a workshop with a team, like we set the clear objectives. What are we trying to accomplish today? And then before the session starts, they do a pre-confidence assessment. And then at the end, they do a post, because I, like you, I want to make sure that I'm leaving things better than I found them.
Yes.
And if not, that I figure out how to tweak things to make sure that I am. So.
Well, and because at the end of the day, what that leaves is in that other person's experience, it always comes back to that, the experience and how that made them feel. So, like I'm going through physical therapy. I told you I'm working on my back right now, and my therapist is phenomenal. He asks those kinds of questions, right? Where are we trying to get to? And he doesn't just ask it at the beginning. Every time, where are we trying to get to? Yeah, both big picture and today. And he's literally saying things like, I want you to be able to do this again. I want you to be able to do that again. And all those things matter. But what he does, which is what I really value, is he asks, and why? Because I don't want to be, totally dependent either. I don't want to be able to not do the things that I was doing 6 weeks ago. And you say, well, why does that matter? Because that leads to things that matter to humans, like I'm making a contribution to other people. I am able to feel a sense of belonging or connection or self-sufficiency or achievement, like those bigger emotions that we often think, how would you measure that? Ask a person how they feel when they could do something for themselves versus when they can't. That's how you measure it. That's the difference. And so I think those types of things, I always break it down. Think about two humans having a conversation. Take it out of the management training frameworks and just two people. If I were trying to help you get to a better place, what would that look like? How would we talk about it? How would we describe it? That's impact, and that's impact measurement. And then we can make it fancy, but make it human first, and then the fancy comes later.
Make it human first, and then the fancy comes later. I love it. Well, speaking of aligning actions with intentions, I think we did pretty well today.
Awesome.
We came in with the intention of hearing about your background, which you shared, and I love just hearing, like I said, that mix of your mom's like opera singing and free spirit, and your dad's entrepreneurship, and how that's all come together to serve areas of friction. And then we wanted to leave folks with tactical tips. And I think we came up with a lot of tactical tips today that people can take and put into practice. So we always end the session with you getting the opportunity to share who you see as inspiring leaders here in the community, in hopes that they might be future guests. So curious to hear who comes to mind for you.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many amazing leaders doing great work. Three come to mind right now. One is Jody Alexander. She is the CEO of YMCA of Greater Richmond, and she's been in that role for now about 2 years. Phenomenal leader with a very, very insightful vision about leadership, culture, and impact. So she's one.
YMCA is like one of like the core foundations of leadership.
Absolutely. Yeah. So she's one. Good friend of mine, Aaron Montgomery. He is a entrepreneur. He's been a founder of several companies, and he is one of those people who does a great job of taking lots of complex information and just distilling it down to like really easy, simple truths. He's a person I go to and I'm like, I'm having a hard time explaining this. He's like, oh, well, it's like this, but only that. And I'm like, yes, thank you, Aaron. And I know he's recently launched his latest venture, but he always seems to have his feet both in community and in entrepreneurship and blending the best of both of those worlds. So he's one. And then the other person that came to mind is Ashley Williams, and she is the founder of the Well Collective, and she does a lot of very, very deep, I would say, personal change-based work that extends to community, and then she's rolled that out into offering some programs and services to businesses. But she is renovating a space downtown Richmond that will be home to workspaces, studios, places for people to do holistic work, healing work, but also connecting work. She's a connection person, so she's somebody I would recommend too.
Sounds like so many people doing good in the community.
Absolutely, which is a beautiful thing about what we have going on in the Richmond region.
It truly is. Well, it has been an absolute honor having you as a guest today. You have such a calming spirit. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Me too.
And just thank you for being here.
Thank you for what you do and for hosting these conversations. It's a wonderful thing. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Thank you, listeners.
Bye.
Hey listener, if you enjoyed today's session, take a moment and like, subscribe, or comment below. Especially leave a comment of a leader that inspires you here in Richmond that might be a great future guest. Also, if you're finding this session compelling and eager to learn more about yourself and your own leadership, don't hesitate to click into my website listed in the description and schedule a complimentary call. I'd love to learn more about you. Thank you.